Welcome, welcome, welcome to FIT CHAT CHIT CHAT. I'm your hostess, Devondria Sanchez, also known as the FIT Therapist, licensed marriage and family therapist, founder, owner, and client of Finding Inner Transformation, where we believe a fit mindset is more than the physical. It is mental, emotional, and spiritual. I just want to thank everyone for joining in. Before we get started, I introduce my guest, my friend, the panelist, Randy. I just want to be able to say for those that are joining in, if you have a comment, a question, or have some feedback, please put it in the chat in the comment box. And if you are watching this in a recording, do the same. Put your question in there so we can get back to you. And of course, at the end, we will let you know how you can find both of us on our social media platforms. But without further ado, my buddy, my friend, come hike with me, Randy. Please tell us who you are.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Randy Grant. If you don't know me, I'm a direct representative of my parents, DeWitt and Gail Grant, who raised me to be the man and the person that I am today. I always give them that praise because oftentimes we don't necessarily thank our parents for the job that they've done. They raised me on the south side of Chicago, born and raised. I love my upbringing, love where I'm from. It's allowed me to grow to be the man I am today as well. And being from Chicago was a great experience as well. So now I'm a husband, a father. I'm retired from the United States Navy after 23 years, retired senior chief. And I just love being active and being outside and doing what I can to stay healthy.
That's so awesome. First of all, shout out to the brother who's willing to shout out his parents, okay? And remind us his roles and who he is collectively and independently. I just love that. And Randy and I go back. Actually, I was trying to think about that the other day. I was like, 2015? I want to say 2015.
2015, yeah.
I think at that time I was prepping for my second show competition, and he would be in there in the gym. We were lifting in the mornings, early birds, 5 a.m. And I just will count it all as God that just keep bringing us back around into circles. So his lovely wife, Miss Anna, let me just say, I knew her and knew him separately and then knew them together. That just cracks me up because when when I found out that they were together, I was like, oh, perfect match. They are both naturalists, nature junkies, and I appreciate that, which is why I asked Randy to come on today as he started his podcast more recently, Come Hike With Me, with his friend Fredo, who I'm sure he can speak to a little bit more as we move down the conversation. I think what drawn me to Randy in general is he's, at least ever since I've known him, and again, that's been about since 2015, he is a athlete. And, athletes come in all shapes, colors, you name it, right? And so he was a runner. And it's funny because yesterday, listening to his podcast, he just talked about, and then I just ran. And then I just ran. And yes, he took me on the hike and he just ran. We'll get to that later. But that is what connected me to Randy, is he was a go-getter when it came to his athletic ability and what he wanted to do, whether it was signing up for a 200-mile race. Yes, I said that, y'all. Or it was going on a hike, or it was lifting in the gym. He put his heart into it, and then just told him, some days when we was unmotivated, right? He didn't mind to keep it very transparent, and I appreciate that about him. So let's just find out from Randy in his own words, for those of you who have not yet listened to the podcast, what made you start the Come Hike With Me or start your hiking journey?
Well, what started the hiking journey is a journey back to my youth, my childhood. Growing up in Chicago, there's nowhere to go hiking. Chicago's actually pretty flat. if you come from where I come from, I mean, walking up a hill is a strenuous day because there aren't any hills there. But what I have always loved and appreciated about my mother is she always saw fit to get us out and to see more than just Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, I'm thankful because I have friends of mine who never left the Chicago until they were either grown, they went to jail, or just never even left. I know people who grew up in Chicago and never even went to downtown Chicago. So it tells you how limited their view and their scope of the world was.
Yeah.
So what I'm thankful for my mother is she took us out every year, every spring break, every summer. My grandparents, they camped every winter. They lived in Iowa, but in the wintertime, they drove their camper to Arizona and they stayed out in Arizona for the winter. They call them snow bunnies.
Mm-hmm.
So my mother always saw fit to diversify our portfolio in a mental way. So she planted those seeds very young. And at the time, as a child, you definitely don't know what life is going to endure. If you had to ask me back as a young person, 10, 11, 12 years old, would I be where I am today? I would say my answer would probably be no way.
Mm-hmm.
But what my mother taking me to all these places did is it broadened my horizons.
Yeah.
It gave me a different view of the world. And then going off joining the Navy at 20, you're a military spouse.
Yeah.
And you know the traveling that we do in the military. I think I've done 8 deployments, everywhere from Iraq, Dubai, all over the Middle East, Hong Kong. So my worldly view is very broad, and for that I'm thankful also. So what took me to the hiking is you said it. I just ran.
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell probably on this little screen of yours is I go 6'3", 250 easy.
Yeah.
And what I've always prided myself as a bigger guy, I've always been bigger than most. Every picture I've ever taken in school, I was in the back. I was always one of the tallest. And I pride myself on doing things, especially now, that most people think I can't do. I've done half marathons, Devon. I've done 200-mile relay races.
Yeah.
These are all things that when, as somebody who's always competed as a kid, I played football, baseball, basketball. So I always had that drive to be competitive. So as you get older, at 46, basketball doesn't feel the same as it did 36 and 26.
Right.
That recovery from basketball is multiple days at a time.
Right.
So I can't get the competitive edge on the basketball court anymore. So when I started running, I always take pride on walking up to that start line.
Mm-hmm.
I see the super in shape people like Dee, and she's standing there, she's zoned out and she's doing all that. And I look next to people like that and they look up at me, and sometimes I get that side eye. And even if it's not a real side eye, in my mind, it's a side eye because I'm about to pick some people out and start picking them off as I run by them.
Right.
And when I run by them, in my head, I'm saying, "Oh, they think they're gonna catch me."
Yeah.
You're not gonna allow them to catch us. I know how competitive you are because you finished at the top of the class, and whenever you go out and do something,
yeah.
So that's where it started. I started just running. I was in Iraq on a 7-month deployment. There was nothing to do but stay in shape. We went to the gym, we ran, and when I came back, I just kept that going. That was 2007, and I think since 2007, I've done well over maybe 30 races, half marathons.
Yeah.
I've done 6 200-mile relay races.
Yes.
You're
gonna get me out there one day. I know he's asked me about 2 times, and you think I would just sign up for it. I'm more concerned about the sleep part than anything, and timing, obviously. But that's one thing I've always appreciated about you is like you just will go after it. It's like, okay, I recently just told Randy I'm taking a few family members to run the half in November. He's like, sign us up. I'm like, okay. That's how he is. He just like, let's do it. If he got time, he's gonna do it.
And I'm not a planner.
I see
So that's probably that's probably a gift and a curse.
I was gonna say,
because there's been some times where I wasn't in the best shape and I got out there, and guess what? Now you're here, you got to do it. So you just get it in.
That competitive nature stands up though, and then the body and the muscle memory kind of just allows you to finish how you're going to finish. And so there's a couple things that Randy pointed out. Number one is his childhood being a definitely byproduct of where he is today, and how he was able to utilize like mental fortitude in being, a veteran, and what he's seeing growing up as an opportunity to do something that is unlike many of the people probably in his neighborhood. Which brings me kind of to my next question is, you mentioned in your podcast and your friend Fredo, who he cracks me up when I hear the two of them talk. And after this, we're going to definitely tell you where you can hear the podcast. They're just very authentic with each other, almost like these brothers that just kind of do their little scrap, but they come together. And he's also a veteran, but he's also a man of color. And so if you are part of the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous people of color, and you hear Black people or brown people don't hike, there's Randy. And now he's shaping Fredo. And so I want to bring this conversation back to when you hear Black people don't hike, or you don't see us even out there hiking, which then would confirm for some people, see, I told you we don't hike. What would you say to that, Randy?
I think what I would say is we have to start to put ourselves in those spaces. When we talk about equal rights and opportunities, it starts in these spaces and places. Yeah. If you look at people of color, we typically go where we feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the history of who we are as a people, I would say many of those things is what prevents a lot of us from going out into nature. Yeah. If you look at the history of our country and the segregation and the discrimination that has taken place, oftentimes these things have happened right in the forest. Mm-hmm. Right in many of the national parks when they first started were completely segregated. So even though the national parks were federal land, the federal government chose to go off the location to determine how that park was run. Mm. So as I embarked on this journey, I started to read and I started to educate myself, because the best way we're ever going to get ahead in life is you have to read and you have to be educated and you have to be able to speak intelligently about the things that you're passionate about. Yeah. So as I started to read these things, it's heartbreaking. Well, my father, even though I grew up in Chicago, my father grew up in Mississippi. Mm. He grew up in a small town of Canton, Mississippi. He was born in 1948. So my father grew up in the heart of the civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. My father was 7 years old when Emmett Till was killed in 1955. Mm-hmm. So that direct lineage, Emmett Till, young man from Chicago, goes to Mississippi, gets killed by two white men, mm-hmm. or somebody alleging for him to whistle at a white woman. So this was my father's path. Yeah. So to hear the things that he went through, my father experienced colored only bathrooms or colored only restaurants or colored only bathrooms. So these are things as a young man growing up, I don't think I necessarily listened to his journey the mm-hmm. way I should have. Yeah. But as I've gotten older, now we have those conversations. Mm-hmm. So when I wanted to start the podcast, you have to be able to speak to why people of color don't go hiking. Mm-hmm. And some of that starts there. Some of it starts with the segregation. Some of it starts with the fear of nature, because when they caught us, they ran us down and treated us like animals. Where did they take us? They took us out to the forest, and did the atrocities mm-hmm. by hanging us from a tree. Yeah.
Ooh, let me stop right there. That's so good. And a lot of us unfortunately don't know our history. I mean, I can even say for right now, just even with my mother having passed at 50 years old and her mother was 47 years old, a lot of that history is gone, right? But what you really speak about is this intergenerational trauma that we now know about, or it's now becoming more evident and talked about, in at least in the clinical world, in the psychology world, in the science world, about really passing down what we call intergenerational trauma, and why some people are doing the things that they do and not even knowing that it's because grandparents have been through slavery or great grandparents, and that stress and that fear and all of that is passed down through epigenetics, which is a whole nother show. But it's like this changing of the sequences in our DNA that starts happening. And the beautiful thing is you get to tap into that history and hear the conversation, and then get an idea even further past your father about what that was like and why we may not be in some of these places. And it's not because necessarily not desiring, but why we don't have the desire, or just not understanding. We're just naive in those areas. But I'm glad to know that, with all of that history that you're collecting, the passion that you have, like, I'm now going forward. And actually, I'm taking some folks with me. So tell us about that. Like, knowing what you know now, collecting the history, being passionate about hiking. Why is it so important now to, number one, broadcast it, and number two, take other people?
Again, representation.
Yeah.
So I didn't start hiking because I was a person of color.
Mm-hmm.
I started hiking because of the competition within myself to be the best me that I can be.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've gotten older, or let me go back. COVID.
Okay.
Who was disproportionately affected by COVID?
Yeah.
It was people that looked like you or I.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because in our community, we aren't the healthiest. We
Mm-hmm.
don't eat the best. We don't stay in shape. We have the cholesterol, the hypertension, the type 2 diabetes. So I've been blessed because I've been active most of my life, that I don't suffer from any of those things.
Yeah.
And I think it's a direct correlation to my activity. So what I want to do is I want to help others be active.
Yeah.
When I'm no fitness model. Nobody is ever going to reach out to me and say, "Hey, we want to put you on the cover of Men's Fitness." That's not going to happen. But what I'm telling average everyday folk is, we could do this. We can beat those odds. So just by making some slight changes in our lifestyle, we can live healthy and happy lives.
Yes.
Another big thing that I get out of hiking is the solitude, is the peace.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy going out. I'm a very visual person. If you notice, D, in the gym, you never saw me on a treadmill.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do a treadmill because there's nothing visually stimulating about the treadmill. So I would rather do a 10-mile run outside than 10 minutes on the treadmill, because visually there's no stimulating in my mind.
Yeah. So yes, I've never seen you on the treadmill now that you speak of it. And just to kind of back up to what you were saying about Black and brown people and not being represented on these areas, and the health disparities that we know, not only because of the ailments, but because of how we got there too, right? And Black women rank number one in obesity, then our Latina, Hispanic women, and guess who follows? The men and our children, and indigenous folks. Are right there with us. And so there's a reason for that. Some of it also has to do with kind of systems have never really been set up in place for us, especially when you think about there's no Whole Foods that I've seen in some of these areas where most Black and brown folks live. There's low access to healthcare
Mhm.
and the system mistrust, right, over the years. So there's several layers. I call it just this casserole, right, of things that keep us. But I'm also hearing Randy say, let's not let that be an excuse too. Let's not allow that to keep us from movement and just getting in a place of being able to be part of some land that we should be represented in. And so when I hear all of that, I think about where you were going into the next segment, which is like being able to be visual. A lot of men are that way, FYI. And but the solitude, you know, what makes someone want to be in a place of solitude and connect with nature? And I love in your first podcast how transparent you and Fredo were about post-traumatic stress dis-ease, dis-ease, injury, not disorder. And a lot of our veterans and people who have experienced trauma, with almost 70% of people will have experienced one traumatic event in their life. We know that there are quite a few folks who may be experiencing post-traumatic stress. And I could definitely see where hiking plays a huge part in connecting more with that because of the solitude. You want to talk to us about that and how that's helped you mentally and emotionally?
Well, ironically, for many years, I didn't know or didn't care what PTSD was.
Yeah.
So you just do what you know to do. And the first time I ever actually talked to a therapist was actually not until I retired from the military.
Yeah.
And as a therapist, your job is to listen and then dissect and help people learn more about themselves. Well, my therapist actually says that she believes I had PTSD prior to ever joining the Navy,
Mm-hmm.
because where I come from, we start to experience death at such an early age, and we deal with things that many people who are grown never had to deal with.
Yeah.
I tell most people I experienced more by the age of 21 than some people experience their entire lives.
Yeah.
You know, I was shot at or involved in shootouts. I've seen people get shot. I've seen people die, get killed. So these are all things that my therapist says that she believes what also allowed me to be successful in the military was that trauma prior to ever even joining.
Yeah.
So this is where the competition, the sports, and all of those things came into play, because the neighborhood I grew up in, sports was heavy. I mean, everybody played sports. It was basketball, it was softball, it was baseball, it was football, it was tennis. So there was always something that was taking place to make us forget about or move on from what happened yesterday.
Yeah.
And that's where the sports, and then later on into the hiking, it's such, what my mother always says is, we just need to go out and appreciate what God has given us.
Ooh. Shout out to mama.
So in the process of doing all that, it was, she thought it was always important for me and my family to create memories. So this is what these hikes do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so important. And again, if we're not out representing who we are, who's going to do it for us when we're gone?
Absolutely. So good. I love that. Yeah. Being, a therapist, and everybody has their different styles. I can definitely tell you, I heavily bring in culture when I am talking to Black and brown folks or the BIPOC community, because we cannot take that out in the way in which we heal as well, in the same way that we may be a little more desensitized to certain things. And that's what I'm also hearing Randy say, is in his childhood, he was like, these things became a norm. You learn how to function in dysfunction. Matter of fact, you don't even know it's dysfunction sometimes. And these become very normal aspects, but we don't have to stay there. And I'm one of the therapists, and my colleagues, shout out to those who are against this, but I hate labels. I hate them. I hate them. I hate them. I mean, you go to certain parts of the world, they don't even know what a PTSD is. They don't know what an ADHD is or ODD. I just want to work on what gets in the way of you being your most authentic, imperfect self, right? In an imperfect world. And so I don't care necessarily about labels, but I do recognize that we have them. And there are quite a few folks, our veterans, more importantly, that are suffering in silence with 22 a day, committing suicide. Let me take that back. Dying by suicide, excuse me. We know that we got to get them connected to purpose. That's one thing my husband and I have talked about is, Randy, a lot like my husband, had an opportunity to retire. Not all veterans will retire. They would, some going for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 6 months, right? And they're considered a veteran. And once they get out, if they don't find purpose, it can really be detrimental to their mental wellness. And so hiking sounds like it's become a really big part of Randy's purpose, and he is blessing us to share that. So thank you, Randy. Let me just tell y'all about my time with Randy real quick. Okay. So Randy and his gorgeous wife took us out, me and my family and another friend of ours and her family, on this hike. And y'all know I work out. I love to work out. And like Randy said, I'm very competitive when I get into races or things like that. But y'all, let me humble y'all, okay? Hiking does not have nothing to do with being a bodybuilder and a runner. And I am both. I'm what we call a hybrid athlete. And so is Randy, right? We like to lift and we like to run. We don't box ourselves into one sport. But let me tell you, sis, bruh, I got some respect. Respect. Is that formal English and grammar? Respect.
I'm down with it.
Okay, thank you. On hiking. Now I will get out here. I ran this morning. I ran 6 miles. Feel great. Got on here. But hiking, y'all, let me tell you something. You want to feel accomplished at the end because you using some parts that you didn't know you had. You using some parts you didn't know you had, and you will successfully accomplish it. But I want to talk to Randy more importantly because I've heard some questions and I want to make sure they get answered today before we wrap up today. Number one is, if you are not an athlete, let me just say this: everybody's an athlete. Okay, you were just in different skill sets. Even those that are on the couch, God has blessed us to be able to move. Okay, even if you don't have any arms or legs, movement is part of our DNA. So, what would you suggest for someone who is just starting out, though, as far as, oh, I'm going to go do a 5 to 8 mile hike because my friends say, yeah, girl, it's fun. Where do one start?
One starts in their neighborhood.
Hold on, don't you move. Did y'all hear? Did y'all hear him? In your neighborhood. Talk about it.
I mean, if you, there's walking trails everywhere. And it has to start in your neighborhood.
Wow.
Because what happens oftentimes when people they watch the social media or they see this TV show or they hear us on this podcast and they get motivated. They're like,
right,
I'm going to do that 5. Well, what you discover very quickly is it's not easy. So if you start with a 1 mile hike in your neighborhood, just log that first mile. Do that 1 mile for that first week. That second week, go with the 2 miles. Because what you have to do is you have to condition those legs to be able to, one, get the mileage up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once you get to the mileage up, then you start at the lower levels of the hikes.
Yeah.
What I always say is I'm blessed where I live at because we're surrounded by all that nature.
Yes.
If you want to go up 14,000 feet in the air, we could do that. If you want to just do something, do that.
Yeah.
So there's such varying levels to it. But start in that neighborhood and get up to the 3 miles, get up to the 4 miles, and get to the place where you are comfortable. Because when you go on these hikes, you have to be comfortable. Because there's some hikes where you may look to your right or to your left, and you're gonna look down, and it's a 2,000-foot drop.
Listen, he's not playing with you. He's not playing with y'all. I love that. Start in your neighborhood. That's so awesome. Now, that's number one. I'm going to tell you another question I just got yesterday. Someone said, I'm not doing it. I'm not taking my kids because a bear come up on me, baby. I don't do bears.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do snakes. We seen a snake on the one he took me on. And let me tell you, it wasn't looking for me and I wasn't looking for it. And I kept on moving. So what do you tell people who say, I don't do bears and I don't do snakes, but yet I want to hike?
You get in your car and you drive every day. Mm-hmm. Every day there's an accident where someone is killed in their car.
Yep.
All you got to do is turn on the news and look at every inner city. Someone is getting shot and killed every day. Mm-hmm. So don't put a limit on yourself, because if you walk in with that attitude, you're not going to achieve the things that you want to achieve by getting in shape.
That's so good. Go past your fears is what I hear. Accidents are the number one cause of death. Let's just be honest. And more importantly, Randy hasn't been mauled yet by a bear. And I'm just saying he's been on 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14 hikes, major hikes, y'all. I'm not talking about just in the neighborhood, hometown. I'm talking about actually driving places and seeing beautiful areas. And what was the hardest one? I know you were talking about it yesterday when I was listening to the your podcast. What has been?
I think the hardest hike is Mount Whitney. It was Mount Whitney. I think we did 22 miles in one day. It's up over 14,000 feet in elevation, over 7,000 feet of elevation gain. So you start at about 7,000 feet of elevation, you go another 7,000 to the top, and bam, there you go.
Listen, he need to do like the old school homeboys. He need to just put a tattoo drop for every hike he done did, and let Mount Whitney be the biggest one, because he killed it. Okay. He's still here. So if you are concerned about the bears and the snakes and building up to these things, you can't allow fear to get in the way of that. But I do highly recommend what he said at the beginning, was starting small and building that mileage and that comfort around it. And I know he's going to speak a little bit more step by step about how, kind of like a beginner's guide to starting. Tell them what you're doing this weekend or next weekend.
Next weekend, we're taking a group of 19 people to Sequoia National Park, and we're going to do Marble Falls hike. It's a 8-mile hike out and back. Nice. It's in the lower levels of the park, so you're not starting up high in elevation. So, and that was somebody who reached out who had listened to my podcast and said, my church wants to start hiking, and after listening to your podcast, we're motivated and we want to do this with you. Would you be down with helping us out? So here I am. And I would tell you this. I said it in my podcast, and everybody always laughs when I say this. I'm a people person who doesn't like people.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I can get on this podcast with D and we could talk from now till tomorrow if you allow me to. Mm-hmm. But I am probably more comfortable being alone than I am with a room full of people. Yeah. So when I go hiking, even though usually my hiking buddy is my wife. We start at the exact same time. We
Mm-hmm.
finish at the exact same time. But
Mm-hmm.
guess what? I usually leave her.
Mm-hmm. Ask me how I believe him because he left me. Okay, y'all. That man left me. And I mean, I was with another, whole group and his wife, thankfully. But we look up and Randy was out. He was gone. I seen him kind of like start up a sprint, but that was the last I seen of him until we got to the end.
Yeah. So, but don't put the fear in there. Now, I will tell you, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. When you go to these places, it's the equivalent of someone coming to your home,
Mm-hmm.
right? If we go to Dee's house, we're going to expect for Dee to be there. That's her
Yes.
home.
Yes.
Now, I've seen snakes whether I was hiking or trail running. I've seen them right on the trail. I've been running and I see a snake 5-10 feet ahead of me. You know what I do? I kept running. I jumped over it. I kept moving.
Mm-hmm.
I've
Yeah.
walked past bears from me to 10 feet away. I've looked over at the bear. The bear looked over at me. I kept on my hike. The bear kept eating, and you just kept it pushing.
Yes.
So you always have to be mindful of your surroundings. When you
Absolutely.
go on these hikes, especially places where they tell you these animals are, they tell you to actually be a little bit noisy, make some noise. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not telling you to go up there and pound on stuff, but when you walk, don't be afraid to make some noise because when those animals hear you, they're gonna go
Right.
the opposite way. So it's
Yes.
all good. They won't come at you.
Thank you for not sugarcoating. Another lady told the lady who asked about the bear said, "Well, as long as you don't got berries and fish in your pocket, you should be all right."
100%.
That and I'm not there to mess with nobody's cubs. We all heard the term "mama bear." I'm not there for that. So, with that being said, I am not one who cares for animals. So, but I know I'm not bothering them. Please don't bother me. Okay. So, and I have not had any issues. And I've been out in the campgrounds several times from where we've had to put our food in bear boxes to, carrying snacks. On the one we went to, we
Mhm.
didn't have any issue. And so I think more importantly is, are you willing to try something different? Are you willing to try something new? Are you willing to come out of your comfort zone a little bit, which I would tell you is. And then recognizing that,
Mhm.
first of
Yep.
all, you know, let's stop with the stigma of Black and brown people don't, because they do. But yes, we would like to see more of us out there, especially if you have been kind of warped and conditioned in believing that Black people don't hike, we don't swim, we don't ice skate, we don't do these things. I think we're breaking barriers all across those kind of activities and sports now. Even with Randy, more recently, there's a group of just African American folks or people of color that do just hike. Is something passionate about, maybe at some point developing something like that here. We run. Oftentimes, I look around and I am proud to say I'm seeing more African Americans and
Mhm.
Latinas and Latinos and Hispanics at races, at runs, and you're just staying in your own lane. Yes, I am a competitor, but at the same time, I'm still running my own race. And I think that's where, if people focus more on that, they would see better results and outcomes. And they wouldn't be so scared to go out and do those things, right? So
Right.
oftentimes, yeah,
Let me tell you a story why we do belong.
yes, please.
So what really drove me to do my podcast was history.
Hmm.
I got to learn about a man who prior I'd never heard of. His name was Colonel Charles Young. He's the third graduate or African American or Black man to graduate from West Point Military School, which are the is the school that sends men and women off to be officers in the Army. So
Hmm.
he was the third Black man to graduate. As he marched up the ranks, he came up during a time where we weren't allowed in certain places. So they sent many of those Army regiments to the West Coast to protect the national parks. He was a part of the Buffalo Soldiers. So they were in San Francisco on assignment when they got the assignment to come over to the Sierra Mountain chain, which is the mountain chain that's right here in Central Valley, California, that goes from essentially Bakersfield, like 200 miles north. So they were sent to Sequoia National Park, Kings Canyon National Park, and to Yosemite National Park to take over these places. And being the prideful men that they are, when they got to these places and they saw everything that they had to offer, their assignments were to complete the roads that go into these parks to allow people access to all that nature. When they took over in 1903, there was only 5 miles of the road that was completed. Over the course of one summer, those Black men finished 18 miles of the road, where prior to them getting there for 13 years, there was only 5.
Wow.
Many of the hikes that are still in Sequoia, Kings Canyon, and Yosemite National Parks, those Black men mapped those trails out and made those trails for us to still take part of today. We talked about Mount Whitney. Mount Whitney is the highest peak in the lower 48 at over 14,500 feet. And it was those Black men that did that trail. No iPhones.
Right.
No. And they mapped these things out, trial and error, to the very top of a mountain. And those same trails, the trails that we use today. Now, the downfall of where you spoke of some of that generational things earlier is, once the National Park Service came into play, they had these different organizations that brought many Black men in, many white men in, to build up all the parks across the country after the successful jobs that Colonel Young and his men did, because Sequoia is one of the first parks to bring the people in. So once people started to come to Sequoia, they wanted to see so much more. So what happened is there was thousands of black men, thousands of white men. And when the National Park Service started, guess who they let go?
Mm-hmm.
And guess who they kept?
Mm-hmm.
So now, how many generations of Black folks did we lose in our parks? Mm-hmm. So that's why it's important for us to represent and to be in these spaces, because we do belong. Yes. And there's so much history in these places that we don't get told, that we have to go out and find these things ourselves. So if they don't want to teach it in school, guess what? That's what we're here for.
Yes.
To share those stories. Because I as many times as I had been to the park before 2019, I had never heard of Colonel Charles Young. Mm-hmm. I didn't know it was Black men that build those roads to go up to the sequoia trees that I saw and loved. Mm-hmm. I never knew those things.
Yes. That's so good. Randy just dropped some knowledge bombs on us, y'all. And I'm going to tell you how I found out through Randy's podcast and talking to Randy before his podcast came out. So I agree. I absolutely agree. And I think it brings some versatility to maybe your regular regimen too. And then knowing the history that you can just be in these spaces, right? And then share that information and pass it on to the next generation. The lady that I was speaking of earlier about the bears and all that, she admitted, she goes, I know it's wrong, but my kids will never experience this as long as I'm scared to go because of the bear, right? So recognizing how our own fears and adversities get passed on. This is exactly what we're talking about when we talk about intergenerational adversity, stress, or trauma. It indirectly is getting passed on, or directly, right? And so I just love what Randy's doing. And absolutely support it. I plan on having him come speak to my church at some point in time. I've already asked him and the veterans group that I'm getting ready to start facilitating, because I think a lot of veterans would connect with this for the aspect of movement and purpose and passion. And most importantly, remember, y'all, the brain, the mind, and the body are not disconnected.
Mm-mm.
They work together. You know, the more we're sedentary, the more it impacts us mentally, the more mental stress that we have, the more it impacts our bodies. And a great way to release stress, trauma, and adversity out of the body is through movement. And so if you're not willing or ready to see a therapist, you know, therapy comes in many forms. And so hiking could be therapy for some people just as much as speaking to someone about what's going on with them. And so with that being said, I want to ask Randy to give us, besides the one huge golden nugget he gave us, the first tip I think I would wrap this whole thing up and say is not only being in these spaces and being with representation if you're Black and brown, but whatever color, race, or ethnicity that you are, is get moving, not only for your physical health, but for your mental health. Is start in your neighborhood if you don't know where to start. That was like Beginner's Guide 101 right there. I mean, if you ever think about, well, where do I start? Is start in your own, as we like to say, backyard, right? Or start in your own neighborhood. And what I want to highlight too is Randy is going to be, he's going to tell us where we can find him, but we're also going to, follow his journey with his podcast about steps. And I know he's going to go through that. And that's why I'm not going to have you just go through everything, go through any of that today. I want them to be able to follow you and get those steps. And then where can they find you? So now you done put it out there. I'm just going to be honest. You done said somebody heard the podcast. Now you got a group of 19. I would imagine after this broadcast and maybe after a little bit of time happens and people start following you, you might find yourself hiking almost a little more regularly than maybe you thought. Is there anything that you want to share with the people as we're wrapping up in your takeaway today? And then I want to give an opportunity for them to find you on social media or your podcasts.
Yeah, what I tell everybody when I see people, whether I was running, whether I'm hiking, I tell everyone that if I can do it, anybody can do it. I was just in Hawaii this past weekend. My wife and I hiked up. It's called Coco Crater. It's over 1,000+ steps straight to the sky.
Wow.
And as we got to the bottom, a young lady took like 10 steps and she just had this defeated look in her face already. And I walked past her and I said, if I can do it, anybody can do it. She took a deep breath. She said, let's go. So yes. I promise you, it's anything you do in repetition, you can do it.
Amen.
Right. So don't limit your growth. Don't limit your experience. If you can't find a state park, find a city park.
Yeah.
They're everywhere. Every state has them in all 50 states and every US territory. There is somewhere for you to go to be active. And just get out there and do it. Let's change the narrative and let's show them that we are more than what they tell us we are.
Amen. Listen, he having church in here and y'all didn't even know it. Y'all didn't know y'all came for church. So I absolutely agree with that. Randy, I know he has several different sports under his belt. It seems like this is that for him. And more importantly, I think just really subscribing to the mission of move. It doesn't matter, just move. And I think it's helped him. And it sounds like it's getting ready to be a part of his friend Fredo's. Also part of his subscription. I heard him in this last podcast, like, I'm ready. And talking about all the things that, some of the things that he wasn't doing that was healthy for his body, right? Whether I think he was talking about drinking soda and smoking cigarettes at one point in time. And, as unfortunately, the pandemic has had a lot of folks have put on weight during this time. And, this is a perfect way, right? And a perfect way just to get out there and not focus on that necessarily, but how you're performing. How do you show up mentally? What Brandy just described about telling that woman, if I can do it, you can, was enough to push her to the next step. And I hopefully she made it all the way up. But you know, being proud of herself is she only made it up to the 100 of them out of the 1,000 steps. You know, whatever that looks like for you, do not worry about social comparisons. I just had a whole training about that recently. Is if we focus on what we're doing, don't look at the scale, look at your performance, look at how you feel, look at the accomplishment of what you're doing, then we're staying in the perfect kind of divine perspective, right? All right, Randy. Where can we find you on social media or your podcast? And then I was to share where we can find FIT Chat Chit Chat on a more regular platform as well.
So on social media, we're on Instagram. It's come hike with me, come_hike with me. We're on Instagram there. We are on all your favorite podcast listening sites. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on Google. All you have to do is search "Come Hike with Me," and it should take you right to our page. If it does not, if you want you to reach out to me, my social media is I'm Randy G122 on Instagram. The same on Facebook. Just look me up, and I'll be more than happy to send you the link. We want to do our part and help people get healthy, happy, and motivate them to do things that they didn't think they could do yesterday. So just check us out. We appreciate it. And so far, we've got such positive responses and views and downloads that we're going to keep pushing, man. We're going to take y'all on the journey. So come on out and check us out.
That's awesome. Thank you, Randy. Hopefully I'll put that in the comments correctly. Come_hike with me on Instagram and Randy G122 on Facebook and Instagram. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Awesome. All right, y'all. Well, this is the Fit Therapist. Find me on Instagram, Facebook at Fit Therapist. And listen, I'm going to stop playing with y'all because my website is done. I need to go on and shout it out. There's a couple more tweaks I'd like to make, but hopefully soon in the next week, that's me holding myself accountable, that I will have the website up and going. And I just can't thank Randy enough for jumping on here. I know that we have very shared interests, not only personally, but professionally, just in general, what we would like to do to help other people gain insight and just grow and heal. And like, we do get one life. And I know we say that very cliche, but this is true. And so how do you want to spend it? How do you want to feel in your body and your mind during this time? And there's some perfect ways that we can do that's within our drive, within our walk, our front door, that we can tap into. So I want to thank you, Randy, for coming on. And thank you all for joining me. If you have any questions, feedback, comments, please put in the chat. If you're seeing this on YouTube in a recording and you have a question for Randy, please reach out to the comment section to him directly, or you can reach out to me. If you would like to be on FIT Chat Chit Chat, please email me at fitchatchitchat@gmail.com. And the next people we will hear is, I'm hopeful that these beautiful women, before Women's History Month is up, will come on and join me, hopefully at the end of this month. Otherwise, I will be speaking with a couple other clinicians who have gained weight during this pandemic and want to talk about their journey as they are in the journey. And so that will be in April 6th, if I'm not mistaken. And just reach out. And we hope everyone has a beautiful weekend. God bless you and take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.